The first glyph lit the moment Dr. Lena Sarova's fingertip brushed the page. She pulled her hand back. The glyph kept burning, a slow amber pulse in the carved channel of the stone leaf, and the silence in the chamber clamped down like a pressure change. Around her, the three Vethani scholars of the Archive Collegium stood frozen in the pale gray light of the reading alcove, their bodies locked in the instinctive stillness of beings confronting something that should not exist. Archivist Tolik had his hands pressed flat against his thighs. Scholar Pale was half turned from the spectral scanner she had been calibrating. Meath, the material sciences specialist, 20 years older than the other two, with the deep-lined face of a researcher who had spent her career measuring things that did not change, stood gripping her sensor array with both hands. The readout screen was tilted away from her as though it had suddenly begun to lie. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. The Codex sat where it had sat for 11,000 years, open to its central spread, the stone leaves resting in the shallow pedestal cradle that had been old when the compact was a scattering of sublight trade routes between three systems. It was the crown artifact of the Vetholan archive, the most studied, most scanned, most debated, and least understood object in the known galaxy. The Collegium had built this wing around it. 700 years of xenolinguistic analysis had been dedicated to its glyphs. 18 species had contributed scholars, models, AI translation suites, resonance scans, molecular probes, and theoretical frameworks. The consensus, ratified by 4 successive Collegium boards across 3 centuries, was unanimous. The Codex was inert. The glyphs were not a language. They were not a cipher. They were not decorative. They simply were, and they refused to be anything else. The reading alcove was the heart of the Vetholan archive, and it was designed to communicate one thing: reverence. The walls were carved from the same pale stone as the Codex's leaves, rising 30 feet to a vaulted ceiling, where daylight filtered through crystalline skylights that the precursors had engineered to focus ambient light onto the pedestal without creating glare. The light that filled the chamber was cool, even, unchanging. The kind of light that archivists could work under for 12 hours without strain. The kind of light that existed for the benefit of eyes, not atmospherics. The Codex itself was the size of a human lectern Bible, roughly 2 feet by 18 inches, 3 inches thick. The stone leaves tessellated so precisely that the gaps between them were invisible to the naked eye. Its binding cradle was integrated into the pedestal, carved from a single piece of stone so dark it was nearly black, the surface polished to a finish that reflected the overhead light like a dark mirror. The contrast between the pale leaves and the dark cradle was striking, and Lena had spent her first 3 days on the assignment simply documenting the craftsmanship of the join. The way the leaves sat in the cradle without adhesive, without tension, held in place by geometry alone. It was beautiful work. It was also, according to 7 centuries of Collegium consensus, dead work, an exquisite artifact with no living function. The amber pulse in the first glyph said otherwise. Until now. "Don't move," Tolik said. His voice was tight, formal, the administrative voice of a man who understood that the report he was about to file would either end his career or rewrite a field. "Dr. Sarova, do not touch it again." She hadn't planned to. Her assignment here was barely worth the shuttle fare. Surface erosion cataloging on the exposed stone leaves, documenting microfracture patterns in the carved glyphs, the kind of meticulous and spectacularly unexciting work that the Collegium gave to visiting researchers they wanted to keep busy and out of the way. She had been running a standard tactile scan, gloved fingertip tracing the edge of a glyph to map flaking patterns, and her index finger had grazed the uppermost line on the left page. A reflex, a slip. The kind of contact that happened 100 times on any dig, unremarkable, unrecorded. But the glyph was still pulsing. Lena studied it. The amber glow pooled in the carved channel of the symbol like poured glass, warm and liquid, filling the stroke from one end to the other. The glyph itself was narrow, angular, with a descending tail that curved left, a shape she had encountered in no reference database, no comparative xenolinguistic model, no fragment from any of the 214 cataloged precursor sites across the Orion arm. She had spent 6 years studying precursor script systems. She had written her doctoral thesis on cross-site glyph morphology. This shape matched nothing. "It's reacting to her," Pale said. Her voice was pitched high, the Vethani stress register that sounded almost musical to human ears. "The Codex is reacting to her specifically." "The Codex does not react." Tolik's jaw was tight, the words bitten off at their roots. In 11,000 years of continuous observation, continuous, scholar Pale, documented and cross-referenced by 17 generations of archivists, not a single glyph has changed luminosity, temperature, position, or resonance. The Codex is classified inert. The Codex is classified dead. The second glyph ignited. It sat directly beneath the first. The next symbol in whatever line the precursors had inscribed into the stone leaf 11 millennia ago. The amber light bloomed in its channel, matching the first glyph's pulse exactly, beat for beat, and a faint warmth rose through the pedestal into Lena's gloved hands. Not heat, warmth. The distinction mattered. Heat was energy, impersonal. Warmth was directed. Warmth was invitation. She felt something else, a vibration, subaudible, running through the stone the way an organ note runs through a cathedral floor. It sat in her sternum and stayed there, and part of her, the part she couldn't name and had never needed to before today, responded to it the way a tuning fork responds to its matched frequency. Tolik was on his comm. She could hear him speaking in rapid low Vethani, the administrative dialect, and she caught the words for containment advisory and non-standard event classification, and a compound term the Collegium used for artifacts that exceeded their capability profiles. In English, the concept would have been impossible. The Vethani were more precise. They had a separate word for impossible things that were happening anyway. Lena's breath was steady. She had trained herself to control it, a technique her mother had taught her during her first fieldwork rotation on Koreth Roman 7, 20 years ago now. Ansarova had stood in the doorway of a half-excavated precursor chamber and told her 19-year-old daughter, "When the artifact surprises you, breathe. The surprise will pass. What the artifact is telling you will stay." Anne had never had this experience. She had never stood before a lit glyph, never felt the warmth of an active codex, never heard the hum that was filling Lena's sternum like a second heartbeat. But she had known it was possible. She had spent 3 decades building models of what precursor technology might do if it were not inert, writing papers that the Collegium cited for their methodology and dismissed for their conclusions. Sarova hypothesis, the xenolinguistic community called it, half respectfully. The idea that precursor codex glyphs were not decorative or structural but functional interfaces, awaiting a specific activation input that the Collegium had not yet identified. She had been right. She had been right for 30 years, and she had died without knowing it. Meath was recording. Her face had settled into the professional blankness of a scientist watching, a result that contradicted every model she had built across her career. Pale was gripping the edge of her scanner station, her wide-set pale green eyes locked on the codex, her breath shallow and fast. The third glyph caught fire, then the fourth. Sequential activation, Pale reported, falling into the rhythm of observation because it was the only safe place she had left. Left to right, following the line, 4 glyphs active. Each one ignites approximately 3.5 seconds after the previous. The rate is accelerating. The rate is impossible, Tolik said, but he had lowered his comm. He was watching now, and his eyes were very wide, and his hands had come up off his thighs. The 5th glyph bloomed. The 6th. The amber was deepening, tilting toward gold, dense and rich, the color of late afternoon sun through dust. The warmth from the pedestal was climbing through Lena's survey gloves into her wrists, her forearms, the undersides of her elbows where the suit material was thinnest. The subaudible vibration had found a rhythm, slow, steady, patient, a pulse that rose and fell with the regularity of respiration, like a heartbeat, like something remembering how to breathe after a sleep that had lasted longer than civilizations. "I want the emission spectrum," Meath said. She lifted her sensor array and swept it across the active line, and the readout chimed once, a tone Lena did not recognize, and she recognized most of Meath's equipment by sound. Meath's composure cracked for half a second, a flash of something raw behind the professionalism. She ran the scan again. Same chime. "Archivist, the emission is not electromagnetic, it is not thermal, it is not particle-based. The array is calibrated for 47 distinct energy classifications. This output matches none of them." "Then recalibrate." "I cannot recalibrate for an energy type I cannot describe." The seventh glyph ignited, the eighth. The gold light was so rich now that it threw shadows, Lena's shadow long and dark behind her, the pedestal's shadow stretching across the floor, the dust motes casting tiny flecks of shade as they drifted through the light and hung there, suspended, arrested in mid-fall by a field that was gentle and absolute and utterly beyond the collegium's understanding. Pale backed away from the pedestal, 3 steps, 4, until her back touched the far wall of the alcove. Her hands were pressed flat against the stone behind her, and her eyes were locked on the Codex, and her breathing had gone shallow and rapid. It was not fear. Lena could read Vithani body language well enough by now to distinguish fear from awe, and this was awe. The scholar was watching something sacred, and her body knew it before her mind had caught up. Tolek moved to stand beside Meath. The 2 senior researchers looked at each other, and something passed between them, not words, not a decision, but an understanding. Whatever was happening to the Codex was real and irreversible, and none of their protocols were going to help. Lena's hands were trembling, not from fear, from recognition. She did not know what she was recognizing, but the feeling was there, deep and old and sure, the same feeling she'd had at 12 years old in her mother's study on Earth, turning the pages of Dr. Ansarova's field journals from the Eridan dig. The conviction, wordless, bone-deep, that the symbols on the page were not arbitrary, that they meant something specific, and they meant it for her, and if she was quiet enough, they would tell her what. 9 glyphs active, 10. "The full line is cascading," Pale reported. 11 glyphs per line, 1 remaining. "Dr. Sarova, when you made contact, did you deviate from standard survey protocol in any way?" "No, same gloves, same pressure, same angle, standard tactile scan, medium contact, index finger." Pale turned to Tolek. "Archivist, 1,841 researchers have performed identical procedures on this exact page. Every species in the Collegium represented. Bare-handed, gloved, instrumented with resonance probes, with particle beams, with neural interface arrays. The result in every case has been the same, nothing. I am aware of the history, scholar. She is the first human to be assigned to the Codex chamber." The silence after that sentence had its own weight. The 11th glyph ignited. The full first line was alive, 11 symbols burning gold in sequence, the light so steady it no longer pulsed but held, a continuous radiance that turned the alcove into a room built from sunrise. And beneath the light, pressing against Lena's mind like a door that had been leaning on its hinges for a very long time and had finally swung wide, came something she had no scientific term for. Comprehension. "I need to read the line," she said. "You cannot read it," Tolek said, reflexive, procedural. 700 years of xenolinguistic analysis. It's activating left to right, sequential, 1 glyph at a time, with consistent intersymbol intervals that are accelerating in a pattern that maps to recursive syntax. That's reading order, archivist. Something in this codex is processing the line. I need to process it with it. This chamber is being sealed in 3 minutes. Administrative containment protocol. Let me try the second line. Tolik looked at her, looked at the Codex, looked at Meath, who was staring at her sensor readout with the expression of a woman who had just been told that gravity worked differently on Tuesdays, looked at Pale, who was already nodding. "Do not remove your gloves," he said. Lena removed her gloves. She did it because the warmth from the Codex was specific, directed, personal, and she understood, in a way she could not have articulated in any language, that the gloves were a courtesy the artifact was willing to endure but did not require. She set them on the pedestal's edge, flexed her bare fingers once, and touched the first glyph of the second line. It ignited instantly. Not a slow bloom, a sharp, clean flare of gold, immediate and certain, as if the Codex had been holding its breath and she had spoken the word it was waiting for. The warmth shot through her finger into her hand, raced up her wrist and forearm, and the subaudible hum deepened by a full register, and the second line began to cascade glyph by glyph, left to right, faster than the first, more confident. The Codex was learning her rhythm. It was matching her pace. "The emission pattern has changed," Meath said, and her voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Dr. Sarova, the light pulses are carrying structured information. Each glyph emits a unique sequence when it activates, and the sequences are compounding, building on each other, referencing each other. This is not a reaction. This is communication." "The Codex does not communicate," Tolik said, but the authority had leaked from it like air from a cracked hull. He was watching the gold light climb the second line, and his fingers were trembling. The meaning arrived. Not as translated words, not as decoded symbols. As understood concepts, pure, direct, immediate, the way fire is understood as hot before anyone teaches the word for heat. The Codex was not being translated. It was being comprehended, and the comprehension was happening in a part of Lena's brain she had no name for and had never felt activate before this moment, and it was the most natural thing she had ever experienced. Like breathing, like blinking, like a faculty that had always been there, waiting to be used. The first line said, "This record speaks only to the blood that wrote it." The second line said, "We watched them build from nothing. We watched them reach." "I can read it," Lena said. The chamber went still. Pale's hand drifted from her scanner. Meath lowered her array. Tolik stood with his calm forgotten in his hand. "I can read it," she said again, and her voice was steady and her hands were warm and the Codex was alive beneath her palms, the way a river is alive beneath ice in spring, moving, present, waiting for the surface to break. "The first line says this record speaks only to the blood that wrote it. The precursors, whoever they were, they wrote this Codex for a specific bloodline, a genetic line, and they left it open and they waited." 11,000 years, Pale said, barely audible. 11,000 years. Tolik's communicator chimed. The administrative tier, the senior scholars who ran the Collegium's day-to-day operations from the upper floors of the archive, was calling with increasing urgency. She could see the priority glyph flashing on his screen, cycling through yellow to amber to the deep red that the Vethani used for events that required immediate institutional response. He muted it. Archivist Pale began. "The Directorate can wait." His voice was flat, final. "We are witnessing something that has not happened in 11,000 years. They will wait." Pale stared at him. In 9 days of working alongside Tolik, Lena had learned one thing about him with absolute clarity. The man did not disobey protocol. He was protocol. His career, his reputation, his identity as a scholar, all of it was built on the precise, documented, procedurally correct management of the most important artifact in the Collegium's care. And he had just silenced a priority override from his own directorate. The Codex had changed him in the space of 2 minutes. Or perhaps the Codex had not changed him at all. Perhaps it had shown him something true, and the truth had done the rest. Lena looked at the 2 active lines, 22 glyphs burning gold in the pale stone, the light steady and warm, the hum in the pedestal, a constant low presence that she could feel in her teeth and her sternum. The meanings of the first 2 lines sat in her mind like settled stones. This record SBAKS only to the blood that wrote IT. We watched them build from nothing. We watched them reach. They were not metaphors. They were not poetry. They were declarations, precise, measured. The voice of a civilization that had compressed its entire legacy into 11 glyph lines on stone leaves because stone endures, and because the beings who carved it had understood that the readers they were writing for would not arrive for a very long time. She needed more. Lena touched the 3rd line. The glyphs erupted in gold, fast and certain, and the meaning flooded into her, compressed, dense, layered with images and context she could not fully unpack in real time but could feel the weight of. The way you can feel the weight of a city through the rumble of its traffic without seeing a single building. The 3rd line said, "When the others fell or forgot, this species carried the flame forward." Carried what forward? Tolik asked. He had not moved from his position beside the pedestal, but his face had changed. The bureaucratic precision was gone. In its place was something raw, the face of a man watching the foundation of his life's work crack open to reveal something underneath that he had never suspected was there. "A pattern," Lena said. "A capacity. They don't use the word gene. Their concept is older, broader, less mechanistic. They say pattern, and they mean a neurological template, a resonance architecture buried in a specific genetic lineage. A capacity to interface directly with their technology, to receive meaning from their inscriptions without translation, without decryption, without any intermediary at all." "A key," Meath said. Her scientific composure had returned, but it was a different kind of composure now. The composure of someone who had accepted that everything she knew was insufficient and was preparing to learn what came next. A biological key, planted in a bloodline and passed down through every generation, dormant, invisible to every scan the compact has ever developed, until the carrier makes physical contact with a precursor artifact, and the artifact recognizes the pattern. "How many humans carry this pattern?" Pale asked. Lena focused on the data stream, the compressed archive flowing through her mind from the Codex's pages, and found the answer waiting, as if the Codex had anticipated the question. Not all humans. The pattern was seated in a specific lineage, and it's been subject to natural selection and genetic drift for 100,000 generations. It's concentrated in certain family lines. My line is one of them. She paused, absorbing more. The Codex estimates that approximately 1 in 8,000 living humans carries a functional pattern. About 1 million people, give or take. 1 million people who could read every precursor artifact in the galaxy, Meath said. 1 million people who have been walking past locked doors their entire lives without knowing they had the key. The thought settled over the chamber like dust. Tolik's communicator was chiming. The administrative tier was trying to reach him. Lena could see the priority glyph flashing on the screen, the Collegium's equivalent of an emergency override. He did not answer it. "Touch the next line," he said. She touched the 4th line, then the 5th. The cascade was faster now, each line lighting almost before her fingers reached the first glyph, the Codex anticipating her, reading her as she read it. The gold light was climbing the walls, filling the upper reaches of the alcove, turning the carved ceiling vaults into channels of liquid radiance. The chamber hummed with the deep, sustained resonance of a system that was coming fully, irreversibly online. The 4th line said, "We seeded the world you call Earth when the corridors were young and the gates still sang." The 5th line said, "We did not make you. We placed within your line the capacity to remember us." Lena's throat tightened. Her hands were shaking and she let them shake. "They seeded Earth," she said. "Not creation, not genetic engineering in the way we understand it. They didn't build humanity. They didn't sculpt our DNA or design our biology. They visited a world that already had life, early primates, hominid precursors, millions of years before the first Homo sapiens, and they planted a neurological template in a specific lineage. The template has been dormant ever since. Passed down generation to generation, silent, undetectable for hundreds of thousands of years. Waiting. That's not possible, Tolek said, and the words were a reflex, the last twitch of a paradigm dying in real time. This codex is doing it right now, archivist. I am reading a language that no living being has heard in 11,000 years, and I am reading it the way I read my own mother's handwriting. Not translating, not decoding, comprehending. The pattern is real. It is functional. It is in my bloodline. The sixth line lit without her touching it. The seventh. The codex was no longer waiting for contact. Her presence was enough. Her proximity, the field of her body, the resonance of whatever the precursors had planted in the Sarova line 100,000 generations ago, was sufficient to activate the glyphs at a distance of inches. The sixth line said, "Your minds are your own. Your choices are your own. Your rise was your own." The seventh line said, "We only ensured that when you reached far enough, the door would open." Lena read them aloud. Her voice was clear and level, and the codex's gold light was warm on her face, and Pale put her hand over her mouth, and Meath set down her sensor array with a soft click that sounded very loud in the humming silence, and Tolek sat down. He did not choose to sit. His legs simply folded, and he went down onto the chamber floor with the quiet finality of a man who had run out of frames to hold what he was seeing. He sat there with his hands on his knees, his gray academic robes pooling around him, and for the first time since Lena had met him 9 days ago, the archivist looked his age. "They look like us," Lena said. She was reading ahead now, the meanings arriving in overlapping waves, images, physiological records, anatomical schemata rendered in compressed glyph data that her mind unpacked into three-dimensional models she could feel rather than see. The precursors. The codex includes their biological profile, bilateral symmetry, plantigrade stance, 5-fingered hands, proportional limb ratios within 2% of human averages. They are Tolek, they look human. "Your taxonomic record is clear," he said from the floor. His voice was small and precise, the voice of a man retreating to the last piece of solid ground he could find. 200,000 years of evolution on a single planet, no external contact, no uplift event, no anomaly in the fossil record. Homo sapiens is endogenous to Earth. We are endogenous. The pattern isn't. They didn't change our bodies. They added a capacity, a neural resonance architecture, and they buried it so deep and so cleanly that 200,000 years of biological development couldn't dislodge it. It just rode along, silent, invisible, passed down through every generation, waiting for this exact moment, waiting for a carrier to walk into a room and touch a codex. Pale was running calculations on her scanner, her fingers moving fast across the interface. "The activation rate is logarithmic," she said. "The first line took 93 seconds to fully cascade. The second took 41. At this rate, by the 10th line, each will cascade in under 2 seconds. The codex is adapting to her neural response time." "It's not just adapting," Lena said. She could feel it, the codex's field pressing against her awareness, not intrusive, not demanding, but attentive, watchful. The way a teacher watches a student working through a problem, ready to offer more when the student is ready. It's calibrating. Each line it reads gives it more data about how my brain processes information. It's building a model of my comprehension patterns and adjusting its output to match. An 11,000-year-old artifact is building a real-time neural model of your brain, Meath said. Her tone was the tone of a woman who had been a scientist for 40 years and had just realized she was going to have to start over from scratch. It was designed for this. Everything about this codex, the sequential activation, the per-glyph encoding, the variable cascade speed, it's all a delivery system. The glyphs aren't static symbols. They're active interfaces. Each one is a transmitter and I'm the receiver. Meath looked at her array readout, then at the Codex, then at Lena. Dr. Sarova, your biometric readings, heart rate, neural electrical activity, cortisol levels, they've all stabilized. When the first glyph lit, your heart rate spiked to 112. It's now at 68. Your cortisol is below your baseline. The Codex isn't just calibrating to your brain. It's calming your body. It's reducing your stress response so you can process more efficiently. Like a parent holding a child, Pale said softly. Nobody contradicted her. She turned the stone leaf. It moved under her fingers with the weight and warmth of something alive, smoothly, as if it had been designed to be turned by exactly these hands. The right-hand page came into view, and its first glyph ignited before the leaf had fully settled. The Codex was no longer passive. It was reading her. The right page held a different kind of data, not declarations, records. Historical archives compressed into glyph sequences so dense that each symbol carried what would have been a chapter in any conventional text. Star charts, gate coordinates, engineering specifications for technologies the Compact had spent 7 centuries trying to reverse engineer from ruins. Medical sciences built on principles the Collegium had never imagined. And woven through all of it, like a thread through a tapestry, was the story of what the precursors had built, and why they had left, and what they had entrusted to a small blue planet in an unremarkable arm of the galaxy. Gate frequencies, Lena said, reading. Corridor engineering schematics. The precursor transit network, the one the Compact has spent centuries mapping from debris, it was designed to be reactivated. The Codex contains the full operational manual, every gate, every corridor, every relay station. All of it dormant, all of it intact, all of it waiting for the key, Meath said. For the key. Meath picked up her sensor array again. Her hands were steady now, and her expression had settled into something Lena recognized from her own mirror, the look of a woman who had stopped being surprised and started being methodical. Dr. Sarova, the Codex's activation has triggered a secondary response. The pedestal's base structure is transmitting a signal through the archive's foundation, not radio, not electromagnetic, the same unclassified energy type as the glyph emissions. I'm reading resonance propagation in the sublevels. What sublevels? Lena asked. The archive has 12 sealed sublevels beneath the main structure, Tolik said. He was still sitting on the floor. He did not seem inclined to get up, and Lena understood why. The floor was the most honest place in the room right now. Everything else, the shelves, the instruments, the carefully maintained scholarly environment, belonged to a world that had just been gently, irrevocably replaced. They were mapped by deep scan resonance 600 years ago. Chambers, corridors, what we assumed were storage vaults. Every entrance was fused. The stone itself bonded at the molecular level by precursor methods. No tool, no energy application, no technique available to any species in the Compact has ever opened them. They're opening now, Meath said, level by level from the bottom up. The Codex's signal is propagating downward, and the molecular bonds in the barrier stone are delaminating. The seals are releasing. The floor vibrated. Not the gentle hum of the Codex, a structural tremor, deep and slow, the vibration of massive systems stirring after a dormancy so long that the concept of duration had lost its meaning. Dust fell from the ceiling, pale, fine, the accumulated residue of millennia, and the gold light from the Codex flared bright, throwing long shadows and far below them, in vaults that hadn't seen light since before the Compact was a word. Something answered the Codex's call. Pale was at the far wall, her hands pressed against the stone, feeling the vibration. I can feel it, she said. The corridors are restructuring. The barriers are dissolving from the bottom up, level 12 first, then 11, then 10. Each level takes longer to open than the last. The Codex is being careful. Careful, Tolik said. Systematic. It's checking each level before opening the next. Atmospheric integrity, structural stability, preservation field status. It's running a safety protocol. A startup sequence. She turned to look at them, and her face held the Vethani expression that Lena had learned to read as awe, wide eyes, jaw slightly open, the tiny muscles around the tear ducts contracting. This isn't just an archive. This is a facility. The precursors left a fully operational facility beneath this building, sealed and preserved and maintained by automated systems for 11,000 years, and the Codex just woke it up. Because I'm here, Lena said. It was not a question. Because you're here. Another vibration, longer, deeper. Then a tone, a single sustained resonant note, rising from the deep levels like a bell struck once in a cathedral the size of a mountain. It passed through stone and floor and pedestal and Lena's hands and into her chest, and it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Ancient, patient, and unmistakably welcoming. Lena turned another page. Reed turned another. The cascade was continuous now. She didn't need to touch the glyphs anymore. Her proximity was enough. Each page ignited as it settled, the gold light flaring, the meanings pouring into her mind in a steady stream that she could control by attention. When she focused on a line, the meaning sharpened into detail. When she let her focus soften, the data settled into background awareness, a humming library she could access at will. The Codex was not just readable, it was intuitive. It had been designed, engineered across millennia of projected biological development, to interface seamlessly with a human nervous system carrying the precursor pattern. The translation was not a translation. It was a native function. She was reading the Codex the way she breathed, automatically, completely, without effort. How many pages? Tolik asked from the floor. Lena looked at the Codex. It was thick, the stone leaves stacked deep in the binding cradle, each one inscribed on both sides with glyphs so densely packed that the surface looked almost textured. She could feel the informational weight of it, a pressure in her mind that was not uncomfortable but was vast, the way standing at the edge of a canyon is vast. You can see the whole thing, but you cannot process it all at once. Hundreds, she said. Each page is a compressed archive, years of reading, maybe decades. What else is in it? She turned forward, skimming the gold light flaring and settling, each page giving her its summary layer before she moved on. Star charts, gate engineering, biological records, material sciences, cultural histories, and threaded through everything, a narrative, not a story, not a legend, but a record precise and measured of what the precursors had done and why. They built the gates, Lena said. The entire transit network, the corridors, the relay stations, the beacons, everything the compact uses to travel between systems, it's all precursor infrastructure, and the compact has been operating it at roughly 3% of its designed capacity because they've been using the equipment without the manual. 3%, Meath repeated. The gates can do things the compact doesn't know about. Multi-point routing, dimensional compression, instantaneous corridor locks across galactic distances. The technology is intact. It's been sitting there, dormant, waiting for someone who can read the activation protocols. Someone with the pattern. Someone with the pattern. Tolik's communicator chimed again. The priority override was flashing, and Lena could hear a voice on the other end, a senior administrator, probably the Collegium Directorate, demanding a report. Tolik looked at the comm, looked at the Codex, and made a decision she saw register on his face like a fault line shifting. He turned the comm off. Continue reading, Dr. Sarova. She read. The gold light held. The chamber hummed. And far below, level by level, the sealed facility of the Vetholan archive continued to wake, atmospheric systems pressurizing corridors that had been vacuum sealed for 11 millennia, preservation fields re-engaging around data stores that contain the sum of a civilization's knowledge, lighting systems activating in chambers that no living being had ever entered. Pale reported each level's status as her instruments tracked the cascade. Level 12 fully active, environmental stable, preservation nominal. Level 11 coming online, 3 sealed compartments delaminating in sequence. Level 10 active, atmospheric holding, a large central chamber with an energy signature that defied her sensor categories. Then she stopped. Dr. Sarova, her voice had changed. There's something in the lowest level, not a chamber, not a data store. The energy signature is coherent, structured, and it has been stable since before the facility started waking up. It was already active when we arrived. It's been active for, she checked her readout, checked it again, for 11,000 years. What is it? I don't know, but it's ascending. Moving upward through the opened corridors, following the Codex's signal, coming here. The chamber floor 15 feet from the pedestal began to glow. A circle of light, 10 feet across, appeared in the stone, not breaking through it, not rising from beneath, but shining from within the stone itself, as if the floor had always contained this radiance and had only now been given permission to release it. The light was gold, the same gold as the Codex, the same frequency, the same patient ancient warmth, and it brightened steadily, filling the circle from edge to center like water rising in a well. Tolik got to his feet. The movement was deliberate this time, not the involuntary folding of earlier, but the conscious decision of a man who understood that whatever was about to happen, he should be standing to witness it. A figure formed in the center of the circle. Not solid, translucent, glowing, composed of the same gold light that burned in the Codex's glyphs, resolved into a humanoid shape that stood 7 feet tall in the middle of the chamber with the quiet authority of a being that existed partially outside of time, and had been waiting with a patience that made 11,000 years feel like an afternoon. The figure was human-shaped, 5-fingered hands, bilateral symmetry. A face rendered in enough detail to read, high cheekbones, deep-set eyes the color of old amber, a wide mouth set in a line that was neither smiling nor stern but something in between. Something that said, I have been waiting and you are here and this is correct. Its posture was calm, standing straight, hands at its sides, no urgency in any line of its body. The composure of a sentinel that had completed its watch and was now delivering its report. Its eyes found Lena. Tolik, pale, whispered, It's a precursor, a stored holographic construct of a precursor. I see it. And it looks human, Tolik said. It looks human. The figure spoke. Its voice came from everywhere, the walls, the floor, the Codex, the air, the stone beneath Lena's hands and the stone beneath her feet. It spoke in a language that was not a language, in sounds that bypassed her ears and arrived directly in the same deep faculty that the Codex had activated. Not translation, comprehension, the most natural thing in the world. Daughter of the first witness. The words entered her mind and sat there solid, warm, enormous. She had read them on the page minutes ago, the Codex's greeting line. But hearing them spoken, hearing them addressed to her in a voice that carried the full accumulated weight of 11,000 years of patience, was different in kind and not merely in degree. Reading was information. Hearing was recognition. The figure continued, and its voice was the sound of deep water and old stone, and the space between stars. You carry the pattern we placed in your ancestors when the stars were young. It has survived every silence, every collapse, every dark age and every forgetting. It has survived because your kind is stubborn and brave and refuses to stop reaching. The figure raised one hand, 5 fingers, palm outward, the gesture universal across species and millennia, and the gold light in the chamber brightened, and images formed in the air around them. Holographic projections, sharp and detailed, hanging in the space between the pedestal and the circle of light. Star charts, gate schematics, engineering blueprints, the compressed knowledge of a civilization that had built the galaxy's infrastructure before any species in the compact had learned to shape clay. Lena stared at the star charts. They were dense with data, not just positions but paths, corridors, gate frequencies, relay protocols, the full operational architecture of a transit network that the compact had been using for centuries at a fraction of its capacity, like a civilization that had found a spaceship and was using it as a wheelbarrow. The compact studies our ruins, the figure said. They catalog our debris. They theorize about our language and argue about our biology and declare our works inert and our codices dead. They do this because they cannot hear us. We do not hold this against them. They are the galaxy's children. They have grown well. But they are not the line we seeded. They cannot read the Codex because it was not written for them. The figure's gaze swept the chamber. Tolek, standing straight-backed with his hands clenched at his sides. Meath, still holding her sensor array, recording what she could not classify. Pale, on her knees in the formal Vethani witnessing posture, tears tracking down her jaw in pale blue lines. We honor them. They have tended this archive with care and reverence for longer than most civilizations endure. They have guarded what they could not understand, and they have done so with integrity. Its gaze returned to Lena. It was written for you. The images in the air shifted. Earth appeared, a pale blue sphere, small and distant and impossibly precious, hanging in the dark like a held breath. Lena saw it as the precursors had seen it. A young planet, volatile and green, its oceans bright, its continents drifting, full of a species that hadn't yet learned to cross its own seas but carried in its cells the key to every locked door in the galaxy. We did not build you. We did not shape your culture or guide your history or choose your leaders. Your wars, your music, your science, your love, all of it is yours. We placed one thing in your line, the capacity to remember. To hear us when the time came. Every generation, the pattern grows stronger. Every century, more of your kind feel the pull of the old shapes without knowing why. The woman who spent her life studying inscriptions she could not decode. The woman before her who died on her way to an artifact she never reached. The woman standing in this chamber now with her hands on our words. My grandmother, Lena said, and her voice broke. Dr. Miriam Sarova, killed in a shuttle accident en route to a precursor site when her daughter Anne was 7 years old. Family records described a woman who spent every spare hour of her life studying precursor fragments with an intensity her colleagues called obsessive, and her grandchild, decades later, would recognize as devotion. She had been reaching for this room without knowing it existed. Dr. Anne Sarova, 30 years of fieldwork across 5 precursor sites, Aridon, Koreth Roman 7, the Pallid Reach, the sunken archive on Veth 3, the delaminated stacks on Primic 9. 30 years of studying inscriptions from secondary scans and partial casts and holographic reproductions, because the woman who had spent her entire career trying to decode the precursor language had never been permitted to touch the real thing. The Collegium had classified the codices as culturally sensitive artifacts. Human researchers, late arrivals to the compact, low status, not yet embedded in the academic power structures, were excluded from direct contact. They were given the peripheral work, the erosion studies, the microfracture assessments, the busy work. Anne Sarova had applied for direct Codex access 17 times over the course of 22 years. Denied every time. She had retired 3 years before her death with a body of secondary source analysis that was cited more than any other work in the field, and that had never, not once, been tested against the real artifact. 3 generations, 3 women, the same pull, the same hunger, the same reach toward something they could not name. Your mother felt it, the figure said, and its voice was gentle now, gentle and vast and impossibly kind. the voice of something ancient speaking to something it loved. Her mother felt it before her. The pattern called to them across every barrier your galaxy placed in their way. They were denied access to the artifacts that would have recognized them. They were told the codices were dead. They were given the smallest assignments and the farthest desks and the last priority. And still they reached. Lena was crying. She did not wipe her face. The gold light was warm on her cheeks, and the tears were warm on her jaw, and the Codex hummed beneath her hands, and the holographic figure of a being dead for 11,000 years looked at her the way she imagined her grandmother might have looked at her if Miriam Sarova had lived long enough to see her granddaughter sitting in this room, touching the thing all three of them had spent their lives reaching for. That is why we chose your species, not because you were the strongest, not because you were the fastest, not because you were the most advanced or the most intelligent or the most numerous, because you do not stop, because when the door is locked and the keepers say no and the records say impossible, your kind builds a chair and sits beside the door and studies it until the door opens or you die. And then your children sit down in the same chair. The figure lowered its hand. The holographic star charts dimmed but did not vanish, hanging in the air like constellations waiting to be named. This archive is yours now, not by conquest, not by theft, not by right of empire or power or force, by inheritance, by the bloodline we seeded and the patience your line has shown across every generation. The Codex will continue to teach you. The facility below will open its records to you. And when you have learned what this archive holds, there are 311 more waiting, across the Orion arm and beyond. Every one of them will feel what happened here today. Every one of them will begin to wake. Lena's hands were flat on the Codex, and the gold light was steady, and the figure stood before her in its circle of ancient radiance. And she understood, with the full weight of what that word meant when the precursors used it, what she was being given. Not power, not authority, not dominion, access, understanding, the compressed legacy of a civilization that had looked across the full scope of its own extinction and in its final years had chosen to trust a planet, to trust a bloodline, to trust the stubbornness of a species that had not yet evolved when the trust was placed. Your mother could not reach them in her lifetime, the figure said, but you will, and those who come after you will reach further still. The pattern grows, the line endures, the doors open. The figure's expression shifted, not a smile, but something adjacent to it, something that carried warmth without sentimentality, recognition without possessiveness. The expression of a teacher watching a student grasp a concept that had taken a very long time to arrive. Your species has a word we have always admired. You use it when someone has been away a long time, and they come to a place that knows them, and the place says the word. We do not have that word in our language. We have something older. But the meaning is the same. Its hand came up again, palm open, 5 fingers spread, luminous and golden. The gesture of greeting that had crossed 11,000 years and the space between civilizations without changing its meaning. Daughter of the first witness, welcome home. The figure held the gesture for a long time, palm open, fingers spread, the gold light steady in its translucent hand. The star charts hovering in the air around the chamber pulsed once, twice, and then expanded, filling the upper reaches of the alcove with a 3-dimensional map of the Orion arm so detailed that Lena could see individual gate positions marked with tiny points of gold light. There were hundreds of them. Some were on worlds the Compact knew well, Vethani space, Korath space, the Primic Confederacy, the Thelen Reach. Others were in uncharted regions, deep space, the spaces between galactic arms where no known civilization had ever ventured. Every gate, Lena said, staring at the map. Every gate the precursors ever built, active and dormant, and the Codex has the activation protocols for all of them. Meath was scanning the holographic projection, her array held up, readings scrolling across the display. The coordinate precision is Dr. Sarova. This map is accurate to the current galactic epoch. It accounts for stellar drift, gravitational perturbation, and galactic rotation over the last 11,000 years. The navigation data has been continuously updated by the archive systems. The precursors didn't just leave a snapshot. They left a living map. A living map that nobody could read, Pale said, because nobody with the key was ever allowed in the room. The truth of that sat in the chamber like a stone in still water. 700 years of exclusion protocols. 17 rejected applications from a single human scientist. A galaxy full of locked doors, and the keys walking around on a planet that nobody took seriously. Tolek was very still. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured, the voice of a man choosing his words with the full knowledge that they would be recorded and replayed and studied for centuries. The Collegium owes a debt, he said, to Dr. Ann Sarova, to Dr. Miriam Sarova, to every human researcher who was excluded from direct artifact contact by our protocols. The exclusion was not malicious, but it was wrong, and its cost was measured in millennia. From outside the chamber, muffled by the thick stone walls but growing clearer by the moment, Lena heard voices. Many voices. The Collegium was responding. The containment protocols Tolek had triggered were bringing security details and senior administrators and probably half the archive's research staff to the Codex chamber wing. She could imagine what they were seeing from the outside. The sealed doors, the gold light leaking around the frames, the structural vibrations passing through the building's foundations. She could imagine their faces. They would come in soon. They would stand where Tolek and Pale and Meath were standing, and they would see the Codex alive, and the figure standing in its circle of gold, and the star charts hanging in the air like a promise. And they would ask what had happened, and Tolek would tell them, and they would not believe it. And then Lena would touch a glyph and read what it said, and they would believe it, and everything would change. But that was the next hour, the next day, the next century. Right now, in this moment, there was only the Codex and the light and the ancient, patient welcome of something that had kept faith for 11,000 years. Lena did not answer. There was nothing to say that the Codex had not already said, in gold light and ancient patience, and a greeting that had been waiting 11,000 years to be spoken. The gold light flared once, bright and warm and total, filling the chamber from floor to ceiling, and then settled to its steady glow. The figure did not fade. It stood in its circle of light with the calm of something that had nowhere else to be and no more urgent business than this moment. Pale was on her knees in the formal witnessing posture, her blue tears catching the gold light. Meath stood beside her with one hand on Pale's shoulder, her sensor array at her side, her face holding an expression that had no name in the clinical vocabulary she had spent her career building, something between awe and gratitude and the humility of understanding, for the first time, how much she had not known. Tolek was at the chamber's comm station. He had turned it back on. He was speaking to the Collegium Directorate in a voice Lena had never heard from him, quiet, cracked, stripped of every layer of professional reserve, reporting what had happened, knowing no one would believe him until they came down to this chamber and stood in the light. But they would come, and they would see. And when they did, the 11,000-year assumption that the codices were dead, that the precursors were gone, that their technology was inert stone, and their script was meaningless marks, would collapse as quietly and completely as a wall that had been sand all along. Lena stood at the pedestal with her bare hands on the open Codex and read. She read for a long time. The gold light did not fade. The pages turned when she was ready, the stone leaves moving smoothly under her fingers, each one igniting as it settled line by line, page by page, glyph by glyph, the precursor's legacy pouring into her mind in a steady, immense, unhurried stream. gate frequencies and corridor engineering and medical archives and stellar cartography and cultural histories and material sciences, and the full, uncompressed record of a civilization that had spanned the galaxy before any species in the compact had learned to grind a lens, and that had looked at its own ending and said, "We will leave a door open. We will trust that someone will walk through it." And someone did. A woman who had earned her place at this pedestal not through birthright but through 3 generations of stubborn, underfunded, underestimated, brilliant women who had refused to stop reaching for something they could feel but not yet touch. Miriam Sarova, who died on the way. And Sarova, who was never let through the door. And Lena Sarova, who touched a glyph on a Tuesday afternoon during the most boring assignment of her career, and opened a library that had been waiting for her since before her species had a name. Somewhere far below, in the 12 unsealed sublevels of the oldest archive in 30 star systems, lights were coming on, one by one, chamber by chamber, corridor by corridor. Systems that had been silent for 11 millennia hummed to life, atmospheric regulators and preservation fields and data banks and projection arrays, and sealed libraries of knowledge that the compact had spent centuries trying to find and had been standing directly above the entire time. The Codex's signal propagated through stone walls and dissolved barriers and cleared corridors, and everything it touched responded. Not with alarms, not with defenses, with recognition. The same recognition the Codex had shown when Lena's fingertip brushed its first glyph. Across the Orion arm, on worlds the compact had mapped and worlds it hadn't, 311 sealed archives felt the signal. Not enough to wake them, not yet, but enough to stir. Enough for a glyph in a sealed chamber on a dead planet halfway across the galaxy to pulse once, with a faint amber light that no one was there to see. Enough for a dormant gate in the outer reaches to hum a single subaudible note and then fall silent again, patient, waiting for the next carrier to arrive. The pattern remembers, the bloodline endures, the door is open. Lena turned another page and read, and the archive, 11,000 years of silence, patience beyond patience, faith beyond faith, exhaled. Finally, you're here.